Thank you very much, Valerie. So I'm presenting this on behalf of Simon Rushbrook. Simon was originally meant to give this talk. He's my co-chief investigator on this trial, but he had to cancel at the last minute for a family member was taken ill, and we wish him and his family all the best. So I'm going to give an update on this trial called ASPSC, and this is about prevention of cholangiocarcinoma, and this is based on the premise that prevention is better than cure, that old adage, and this is particularly so when there is no cure. Now, the majority of patients with cholangiocarcinoma have no obvious risk factors, but about 30 to 40% do have a recognized risk factor. And those that do, the commonest predisposing risk factor is a condition called PSC, primary sclerosing cholangitis. And most patients with PSC are young, and most of them also have inflammation, not just in the bile ducts of the liver, which causes increased cell turnover, but most of them also have inflammation in the bowel, and they have inflammatory bowel disease as well. And so patients with PSC are at risk of liver damage, liver failure, cirrhosis, but they're also at high risk of multiple cancers, including the liver, the bile ducts, and colorectal cancer. Now, there's no medication that is currently shown to reduce that risk, and if a patient with PSC gets cirrhosis and liver failure, then they can have a transplant. But if they get cancer before that happens, then it's a very difficult place to be, because cancer is usually, and there are some exceptions which Professor Thorburn will talk about later, but the vast majority of patients who develop a cancer are not going to be listed for transplant, because after a transplant, the medication that you have to be on, it's very, very likely the cancer will come back, apart from very few exceptions. So patients in this condition who have PSC and inflammatory bowel disease, they have annual colonoscopy to look for any cell changes, to try and pick up any risk of colon cancer, really. But there's no screening or preventive mechanism known to reduce the cancer risk in the liver and the bile ducts. And this is really what's called a black box in hepatology, my specialty. PSC was first described in 1867, and to this date, despite all the advances in medicine, to this date, transplant aside, there has been no medical or drug intervention that's shown to reduce the risk of progression of liver damage in patients with PSC and the risk of liver cancer. So this is really a big area of unmet need. So the background to this study, and the idea actually came at a conference, at an AMMF conference some years ago, when myself and Simon were talking about aspirin. There has been some chatter, some scientific theories that aspirin might reduce the risk of cancer generally, and including in the types of cancers that patients with PSC and inflammatory bowel disease get. This is a list of studies, and numbers 1 to 6 here are what we call retrospective studies, or cohort studies, or case control studies, where people have looked back at where investigators have looked back at patients who've had cholangiocarcinoma or liver cancer or bowel cancer, and then compared them to people who were similar but didn't get the cancer and looked for any differences. And one of the things that has come up is that people who were less likely to get cancer seem to be, for one reason or another, taking aspirin. And whether that is coincidental or whether there's a biological relationship there is difficult to know unless you do a trial or have any scientific evidence for that. And then number 7 on this list was an actual trial of aspirin versus placebo in a randomized double-blind fashion in a condition called Lynch syndrome. So some of you will know about Lynch syndrome, some of you may not know. Lynch syndrome is basically a genetic condition where there's mutations in various things that fix your DNA when it's broken. And patients with Lynch syndrome are at much higher risk compared to people without, of multiple cancers, including colorectal cancer. And in this trial, led by Professor Byrne and his team in Newcastle, was published in 2020. They did a randomized control trial where I think about 500 patients, I think half were randomized to aspirin, half to placebo. It was double blind, no one knew who was getting what until the end of the trial. And the patients who were on aspirin, they had their hazard ratio, so their risk of getting cholangiocarcinoma, of colorectal cancer, was significantly reduced compared to those who didn't get aspirin. And there's also some evidence to suggest that maybe aspirin, even after a diagnosis, might improve survival. So this is all retrospective studies, apart from that one trial, which was in Lynch syndrome, which was a real-world trial. So to me, I thought, well, there's some evidence there to explore aspirin in preventing patients with PSC getting cancer in the first place. And then we're also scientists, so what's the science behind it? And there is actually a whole literature of basic science looking at how aspirin may potentially modulate or reduce the risk of cancer development. And there's a whole literature about this, and I've summarized the factors here that I think are the key ones. Aspirin inhibits COX-2, it prevents platelet aggregation, inhibits NF-kappa B, it modulates Wnt signaling, which is a cancer pathway. Aspirin has been shown to upregulate the genes that produce proteins that suppress tumors, and aspirin has been shown to stabilize DNA mismatch repair proteins, so fixing broken DNA before it can lead to cancer cells. So this was the background to a trial where we aim to see, does aspirin improve PSC-related cancer, overall survival, without causing any significant side effects such as liver damage. And then at the same time, we thought, in this trial where people will be on aspirin or placebo for 5 years, they'll have a site visit every 6 months where they'll be asked to donate some biofluid, urine and blood. They don't have to, it's not a deal breaker. They can enter the trial and not donate samples if they want to. But the idea would be that whatever the aspirin does or doesn't do, the secondary aim of the study was that we will potentially have a unique biorepository of samples that have been collected 6 monthly for 5 years in hundreds of patients, some of whom will get cancer, some won't, some of whom will get cirrhosis, some won't. And that would be a biorepository that is quite unique, unlike any other in any condition, particularly in this condition, that would be available for all researchers anywhere in the world. So this is the investigator team that Simon and I put together. And again, really, this was done with the support, and I'd really want to shout out, a big shout out to the AMMF and PSC support, and they were very much part of the protocol planning, writing the grant application, doing preliminary studies on patient engagement, and honestly, 100%, we would not have got the grant to do this trial without the support of the AMMF and PSC support. And particularly, I want to thank Martine and Helen for their involvement in the planning of this trial. And Nick Johnson is our lead trials unit. So this is the trial design. It's in patients who've got PSC and IBD. It's a phase 3 trial. It's investigator-led. So that means that it's investigator-led. So that means it's not funded by pharma. So we, which has potentially a problem because pharma trials pay hospitals more than investigator-led studies. The intervention is aspirin versus placebo. It's a multi-center, double-blind, randomized trial. 2 out of every 3 patients randomized will be given aspirin. Now, PSC PSC is a relatively rare condition. It's estimated somewhere between 5 and 10,000 people in the UK have PSC. And so when we wrote the trial grant, we said it would take a long time to actually get the numbers of patients we need. I'll come to that number soon. So we said it would take 5 years to recruit the patients. Those who volunteer to enter the trial, they'll be on aspirin or placebo for 5 years, and then we'll look at the data, and then we'll be collecting the samples. And then when we did the power calculation, which tells you how many patients you are likely to need to prove or disprove your theory, it was 774, which is a very, very large number for a rare disease. So that might be maybe about 20% of all potential patients in the country with the disease. So it's very, very, it's a very challenging number to recruit. And assuming a dropout rate of 20%, we'd like to recruit 900 plus. So the trial would take 10, 11 years to do. You can collect all those samples. So I thought, we're not going to get this grant because it's an 11-year program, right? And it was costed at several £1 million. So I was very pleasantly surprised when we did get the grant from Cancer Research UK to do the trial. This is so the primary endpoints are development of cancer, whether they need a liver transplant, overall survival, and then secondary endpoints. We wanted to just check that aspirin's safe and there's no increased risk of bleeding events and there's no negative effect on liver function or flares of inflammatory bowel disease. And that's the number I've said. So recruitment to date. So we have funding from Cancer Research UK for 60 sites. Most of the sites have opened in the last 12 months, and we've opened 44 sites to date as of this week, and so we have another 10, 12 in setup at the moment. Although that says 4, but there's another 6 now. I checked the live tracker, and now, as of this morning, we've randomized 149 patients from 40 sites, and we're in the second year of recruitment. And for those investigators here who work at their local hospitals, this trial is open to the Associate PI scheme, which means if you have an interested registrar, junior doctor, they can be involved in trial in recruiting patients, and they get a recognition for that on their portfolio. So these are, and this is truly a UK-wide study. We have centres in Scotland, all over the UK, and Wales is now joining us, Cardiff is joining us. This is a list of, and trials are challenging, really, because at every site there will be a team of specialist nurses who are involved in trials, and there will be a local specialist who's in charge of trials, and they are involved in various other trials, including not just this trial, but there might be trials on fatty liver disease or new treatments for inflammatory bowel disease. And as the chief investigator based in London, I don't have any local control about what happens to anyone else. So it truly is an absolute pan-national effort, and I'm very grateful to all these people whose names are listed here. So the top line is where we would like to be in terms of recruitment. The blue line is where we are at the moment. So over the next couple of years, we really need to boost recruitment to this trial. And very happy to discuss this in the Q&A session, and I'm open to ideas about how we boost recruitment. Because although Cancer Research UK are committed to funding this trial, the funding for the trial is released annually pending recruitment. So it's a real-world issue about how we get more and more patients recruited, and it's about informing patients, but it's also about local NHS issues, and which is why my question to Shane this morning that I was going to ask was about how we make trial recruitment easier. So I'm going to stop there, because I know we're running a bit out of time, but I'm happy to take questions on this topic later. Thank you very much.